We're just getting the statement in from the White House. The president has pardoned Scooter Libby, the former chief of staff to then Vice President Dick Cheney. A lengthy statement just released by the White House. Jim Acosta, our chief White House correspondent, is on the story for us right now. Jim, tell us a little bit about the president's decision, which is potentially very, very significant, especially given the current context.
That's right, Wolf. Scooter Libby, who was, of course, a part of that investigation into who leaked the identity of CIA agent and operative Valerie Plame during the George W. Bush administration. This was all it was all really in reference to the case that was made for the Iraq War during that time period. Scooter Libby was under investigation, as were other administration officials, for the leaking of Valerie Plame's identity. He was convicted of perjury in that case, and the president announcing today, the White House announcing today, that the president is going to pardon Scooter Libby. So that is happening now. That just was announced by the White House in the last several moments. Now, the reason why all of this is important, a couple of different things. One is we should point out that Scooter Libby's attorney, Victoria Tensing, she is married to Joe DeGenova, who we should point out, and just in the last couple of weeks has been talked about as potentially joining the president's legal team and going up against the Mueller investigation. That didn't pan out. There were conflicts cited as the reason why Joe DeGenova did not sign on. But perhaps more broadly and more importantly, Wolf, the reason why this is important, and you're hearing a lot of legal analysts bring this up, is that the president is showing a willingness to use his presidential power to pardon people. And of course, there are concerns that if the Mueller investigation continues to go down this road, and you have convictions coming in the not too distant future, that the president could essentially be sending a message to people who might be tempted to cooperate with Robert Mueller that hold on, essentially hold on, don't cooperate too much, might be the implication here, because if you do end up going to jail, you could be pardoned later on. That of course is the message that some people are talking about, that is the concern here, that the president, by pardoning Scooter Libby, may be sending a message to people who are just essentially ensnared in the Russia investigation, Wolf. Obviously, all of that is going to come up at the briefing this afternoon with Sarah Sanders when she holds that briefing in about an hour from now. But the pardoning of Scooter Libby, a figure from the Bush administration, part of that entire episode, that saga over the wrongful case that was made by that administration about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. There is some closure in all of this, I suppose, in Scooter Libby being pardoned, but it's certainly going to raise a lot of questions, Wolf.
Certainly will. At the end of a statement that the White House released, the president said, "I don't know Mr. Libby, but for years I have heard that he has been treated unfairly. Hopefully this full pardon will help rectify a very sad portion of his life." Jim Acosta, stand by. Jamie Gangel, you've done a lot of reporting on the Scooter Libby convicted of perjury, obstruction of justice. He received clemency from President Bush, but not a full pardon.
It was commuted by President Bush, but President Bush decided he was not going to pardon him. And this became very public because Vice President Cheney went to the mat with President Bush and said, "You can't leave a wounded soldier on the field." President Bush decided he could not go there. So this is a big move by Trump. Here's some context. I know that Vice President Cheney and Victoria Tensing and Joe DeGenova, among others, have been lobbying President Trump about this for quite some time. But I think there is something very specific here that spoke to Donald Trump. No one in the Valerie Plame case was ever convicted of leaking her name. It was not, in fact, Scooter Libby. The prosecutors knew from day one that it was Richard Armitage at the State Department. And supporters and conservatives of Scooter Libby have always felt that this was a case of prosecutorial overreach. And who were the two people involved in that case? James Comey, who appointed the special counsel Patrick Fitzgerald. So this speaks to Donald Trump in a way that I don't think any other case would, because this is the way he feels.
I mean, do you think it might be a coincidence it's the day after the Comey book came out? I mean, I'm just saying.
Timing.
I'm just saying. And obviously, he's just sticking his thumb in his eye. Look, he may agree that he should be pardoned, Absolutely. He get his law license back, as David we were talking about. But it sends a signal to people like Paul Manafort. Yeah. Somebody like Manafort, who faces the rest of his life in prison, for example.
This is also Trump forward with a view that none of this matters and that the rule of law doesn't matter. President George W. Bush didn't pardon him because his lawyer Fred Fielding said, "You can't do this. That's right. This is going too far." And President Bush was angry with Vice President Cheney about going to the mattresses on this whole point. So this is the reality that this president, who is being investigated, to what extent on this question we can't know, of obstructing justice by firing Jim Comey, but certainly Robert Mueller knows about it. Now, whether he could be indicted as sitting president is a separate matter. This could be referred to the House as part of a report by the special prosecutor. But just, again, his contempt for this investigation is evident, I think, by reaching back to somebody who he doesn't know but he heard was mistreated, so therefore as president he should just pardon him.
So my sources are telling me that the main person that this move is going to is for Manafort to say, look, this is what I'm doing. And Jim Acosta was absolutely right. But you also have to remember, when you look at this moment in time, the president is very strategic. He understands that there's something else that Mueller is doing in the background. He knows that something else is percolating. So he wants to start moving this piece so that all of those, to include primarily Manafort, understand you can be pardoned if you just
But think of what to quote Trey Gowdy, who is the Republican former assistant U.S. attorney in Oklahoma, said about President Trump, if you're innocent, then why don't you act innocent? I mean, this is this kind of behavior like, oh, it's a signal to Manafort that don't cooperate. What's he got to hide?
No, and it's also it's a flexing of his presidential muscle. You know how frustrated he is that he can't control the Justice Department. He can't control the FBI.
And he's not supposed to. There are policies that say he's not supposed to.
Yeah. Of course, but he's frustrated that he can't. Well, this is one thing he can do. Well, and he can do it with the stroke of a pen.
Laura Coates is with us, too, our legal analyst. The president certainly has the authority to go ahead and pardon anyone he wants.
He absolutely has presidential pardon authority. You saw this earlier in his administration with Sheriff Joe Arpaio, the controversial sheriff out of Arizona, in his handling of undocumented immigrants. But I think that this commentary, if you just switch out the players, his message is for Rod Rosenstein and Robert Mueller. Why? Because at the time that there was a special counsel appointed, an independent prosecutor appointed to oversee the matter involving this man, Scooter Libby, the deputy attorney general at the time was Jim Comey. And the Patrick Fitzgerald character was the equivalent of Robert Mueller. And so if you're saying to these people that I believe that there was a scapegoat here or a witch hunt of sorts about a particular person, and I'm going to rectify that particular wrong and show you how I believe that past will now be prologue, well, there you have the new game that Donald Trump is playing. And I think that's a comment to what he can do in exercising his power. It's also a way for him to try to undermine. But the key thing here is, well, he has absolute presidential pardon power in federal crimes. As I said before, the Mueller investigation has diversified to state level as well as the Attorney General in New York. There is EDVA, Eastern Virginia crimes. There's SDNY in New York. That diversification of all the different challenges and investigative channels makes all of these separate investigations virtually go on autopilot, especially on the state level. So I think that it is certainly a commentary about how he views witch hunts. But the larger irony here, in addition to what he's trying to say to these people, is that this is a man who's been very vocal about his disdain for leaking, his disdain for people who lie. He even called James Comey Lion Comey. Well, I guess that's not the real issue he has. It's about whether they wear a pointed hat and call it a witch hunt.